And welcome back. Our first segment, as we mentioned prior to the commercial break, is a discussion with Dr. Jorge Hidalgo, who's here with us in studio to discuss Omicron and what we need to know about this new variant. Good morning, Dr. Hidalgo.
Good morning, and thank you to having me again. It's a pleasure to me.
So we've been discussing casually over the past few weeks, once we've learned that there's this new variant that we should be looking out for, about how rapidly Omicron is spreading. I know it was initially detected in South Africa, but since then, it has been detected in other countries. That's what we know preliminarily. Perhaps what we don't know is the makeup of this particular variant and what makes it so transmissible. So perhaps you can begin there.
Yes. Well, and again, thank you for having me. And then, as I said, let's try to do a brief recap of what is on the facts. No.
Yeah.
The first case, as we know, was detected in Botswana, and then, of course, in South Africa was the first country that started to report different cases.
Yeah.
Officially, it was named as Omicron in the 26th of November. And then the initial cases and the initial information we got from South Africa is that despite that the virus was spreading, the form of presentation was mild. No? And of course, that is something that with the virus is very interesting, especially when we talk about the mutation. No? When we also mention the different variants,
Yeah.
and then we usually stop and saying that the natural way of a virus is to mutate and to survive no matter what. I mean that we will do many things, but the virus, it will find a way how to survive. And for that, the virus have the different mutations. Some changes in the virus or some mutations essentially are irrelevant and pass inadvertently. But some other mutation, it will cause some important changes. And then that means it's going to be more transmissible, it's going to cause an immune escape, it's going to be more virulent. And then we then say, okay, that is probably some of the terms we've been talking very often, and it's the variants of interest. And that means that essentially in the genetic information of the virus, it made this virus more transmissible, more virulent, and also affects the way how the clinical presentation is made. And also it start to see an increase in number of cases or cluster around countries or specific regions.
Yeah.
And this we call it that the virus of interest. But when the epidemiology changes and make the virus that has more impact, then we call it the variants of concern.
Yeah.
And of course, the one that we are dealing right now is the Omicron.
Yeah.
One of the questions, if I could ask, is that people want to know if the vaccine that they have taken, how does it hold up against this new variant?
Okay, there are a couple important questions that we need to basically answer together. And one is if is this virus more transmissible? And then we based on the information we have, we know that it's more transmissible. The second aspect is if the virus have the immune escape. All the Omicron, the different mutations are located in the spike protein, and it's essentially the area where the different vaccines and also most of the different treatments are targeted. I mean that one of the main concerns at the very beginning is if the vaccines we are having right now are still effective against Omicron. Now, all the information that we have right now is a preliminary information, and the preliminary data we are getting stating that is basically saying that the vaccines, the actual vaccines, are still working against Omicron.
So let's talk about what we do know so far. It is a variant of concern, which means there are changes that make the World Health Organization and other health entities worried about this spread. As of last week, I think it was over 70 countries that have already identified Omicron within their countries. We see international reports where, like the UK, for example, recorded the highest number of new infections in one day than throughout the entire pandemic. We see New York doubling cases, new cases every single day. So really kind of showing us the example of what you just mentioned, that the concern of Omicron is how quickly it spreads. Do we have any data yet to know how many people can be or would be infected by exposure from Omicron?
Yes, well, the first thing is that the increase of transmission of Omicron is have a different ways, and then is an important science and data that is coming from Hong Kong, and talking about the transmissibility and why this virus is more transmissible. One of the things is important is that the information we have is that the virus is essentially in the respiratory tract. It will affect the passages and to the bronchial area. 70 times more than the Delta, no, and the
Wow.
original SARS-CoV-2 that we knew.
So Delta was double the rate of transmissibility of the first detected SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah.
And now Omicron is 70% more than Delta.
In this particular area of the bronchial, but interestingly, when we go into the lung tissue,
Yes.
that essentially is where people get sicker, is 10 times lower than the original SARS-CoV-2. No? Mean that this one probably is one of the reasons why this virus is in a way behaving in a milder form compared with Delta. No?
So it has positives and I don't want to say pros and cons, but I guess the bad news about this variant is what you're saying, 70% more, what's the word? It spreads?
In the bronchial tree, in the passages of the bronchial.
So like, that's where we would cough or sneeze, so that means we spread more virus that way.
Exactly.
But the thing that causes severe illness, which is that replication within the lungs, that's slower
It's
with
10
Omicron.
times lower compared with the original SARS-CoV-2. No?
Okay.
Now, of course, this is the preliminary information, and that is where exactly we need to be very cautious.
Yeah.
Because, of course, as we initially said, most of the cases are basically presented with no symptoms, with a very mild, we can say, a typical presentation. As you mentioned, UK, UK is reporting an average of 90,000 cases per day.
Yep.
From those cases, the amount of hospitalizations that they have related with COVID, an average of 50% of those admissions were admitted for other reasons rather than COVID, meaning that those patients were admitted thinking on other possibilities, probably a patient with a congestive heart failure, or a relapse, or a patient with a relapse of lupus, and then they tested, and the PCR test came back positive for Omicron, meaning that also the presentation of this could be very atypical, or we are probably go to the hospital thinking other reasons rather than Omicron.
Yeah.
So the government of Belize, via its cabinet brief, has issued the measures that they're trying to put in place to kind of stave off Omicron as best as possible. How do we know when Omicron is here in terms of the clinical processes that you need to take to be able to detect this variant in country?
Well, one of the advantages that we have in Belize now is that we have the ability to do our own sequencing in home. No? I mean that is really put us in a really
Yeah.
advantage position, because that is one of the reasons why initially we say that in average the Omicron is being detected in an average to 70 to 77 countries, but more likely it's more countries, because not everybody have the capacity of do sequencing. I mean that we will have this information, and unfortunately is no doing sequencing is not something that like I have the sample, go to the lab, and it will be reported in 24 hours. It's especially those countries that they don't have the ability, they need to prepare the sample, the process of sending the sample out of the countries. I mean that process, it can take 3 to weeks or more than that to get back results. We have the advantage now that that process is done in country
At the Central Medical
at
Lab.
the Central Medical Lab.
Yeah. And they're being taught how to do the sequencing for Omicron.
Yes,
Yeah. So we would be able to start to test our positive samples soon, I would hope.
I think so. That's the idea. No.
Yeah.
But the other part about it is that we've seen with each of the variants that have spread rapidly, the first COVID symptoms that we were looking out for were different from the Delta symptoms. What are we looking out for with Omicron? It's shifted a bit, right?
Yes, as we mentioned, and of course, again, all this information we are learning every day from what is happening with Omicron. And then one of the preliminary information we got from South Africa is that the symptoms are different, in the sense that most of the time the patients are going to complain just of a headache, general tiredness, muscle ache, and that is going to be the initial presentation. Most of the patients are going to be completely asymptomatic, or some of the patients are going to essentially be detected in hospital, but the reason they are attending to the hospital is because of other reasons, no, rather than thinking that they have COVID or Omicron in that case.
There are two groups of people that I wanted to ask you about specifically and their risks to the Omicron variant. One, persons who have not received a booster shot. So we know unvaccinated, clearly they're at risk. We know that. But if I've only received 2 doses and I haven't gotten a booster and it's been 5-6 months, am I at risk for Omicron?
Definitely no. If you don't have the booster, essentially we believe that after 6 months the protection of the vaccines is definitely less. No? I mean that it's really advisable for those that are already in time that they need to go and get the booster. No?
If I have gotten COVID in the past, am I at risk for reinfection with Omicron?
This is the other thing with Omicron, his ability to spread, and the other aspect is that you can get a reinfection with Omicron.
Wow.
You can be reinfected.
Is there a concern that a reinfection would be more severe? Like, when you get a disease the second time, it's worse?
It's difficult. Again, all the information that we have is preliminary. We don't know. I think so. We have collecting data, and I think so. As the pandemic and the Omicron is evolving, we will know more, and we'll be able to answer more those type of questions.
Now, when we hear some of the reports, and as you clearly stated, the lungs aren't as severely affected as we saw with Delta. I mean, I saw x-rays for myself. It's like overnight, it just takes over. But how do you still drive the point home to people that, especially in the cases of places like Belize, even if we have a wave of Omicron with people with milder symptoms, it can still be a very critical situation for us?
Yes, the situation in terms of, and you mentioned already, the aspect of who is going to be more vulnerable, hasn't changed. I mean that the people that have pulmonary problems, the people that have heart issues like congestive heart failure, hypertension, people with diabetes, people that are undergoing cancer treatment or they are diagnosed with cancer, people with immunological condition, those vulnerable population is still the same. And one of the most concerning issues is that, that the fact that since everybody say it's a mild form of the disease, the problem is that we will have more cases, and if we have more cases, that means the chances are that we have more hospitalized patients, and if we have more hospitalized patients, mean some of them will end in ICU, and we will have some deaths that already, for Omicron, deaths are already being reported.
Yeah. So the vulnerable groups remain the same.
Remain
That
the
hasn't
same.
changed.
No.
Including pregnant women. I know
Exactly,
we have a challenge with that here. But I guess what you're saying, and it's such a critical point to drive home, or fatality rate, I think, is between 1 and 2, right?
Yeah.
Percent. So if you're talking about 2% of 100 cases detected, that's 2 people. But if we have a huge outbreak and it's 10,000, then we can see how and I mean, when you look at the hospital care that is needed, and whether or not people will survive that's a whole other issue. So I want to ask you, as a critical care specialist, and someone who's been actively treating COVID patients for the last almost 2 years, how concerned are you about this variant?
Well, this is again, for us, it's really concerned because again, we cannot take it so lightly. We need to, we, as we always say, this is a social responsibility, and all of us are together in this to be able to control it. I mean that we need to act responsible based on that. And of course, one of the things is that if we have an outbreak, even if it's say mild to moderate cases, the problem is that we are going to stress a health system that is already stressed. Mean that everybody, all of us, and I'm talking about in general, not only as a medical and someone who is in the front line, but everybody is already tired. And of course, everybody of us would like to go back to a more regular life, but unfortunately, it's not the case. We are essentially finishing the 2nd year and enter the 3rd year of the pandemic.
Yeah. And what's ironic about it, as you've mentioned, is that while we're just about over the whole idea of the COVID pandemic, these variants, keep popping up, because one may be detected in South Africa today, next month a new strain pops up from somewhere else, and then we're right back at it again in terms of, having to abide by all the protocols and not knowing how long this variant will be around before something else mutates and takes over.
And that's precisely the case, no? And is the nature of the virus. I mean that the virus, it will continue to mutate again, and that's an important point, because if the more cases we have, the more possibilities are that this virus are going to mutate, and then we will dealing with a different variant. This one, as we mentioned at the beginning and in our previous conversation, is a virus that have many things, different mutation in a very critical areas of the structure of the virus itself, and that's why despite that we say that it's a mild form, we are still collecting data, and we will probably know more in the following weeks.
With all the mutations recorded with Omicron, do we know if current treatment is holding up against severe Omicron?
Yes, that's another important question. The most of the armamentarium that we have, like the steroids and interleukin-6, that is the most common medication that we usually use in the patients, especially in patients admitted in the hospital. We know that it's still working because those medications target different areas of the virus. That we don't know as yet, and we will have more information, is about the antimonoclonal antibodies. I think so that's is something that, because those targets are different, especially in the spike protein, and then we will know more in the following weeks. But at least interleukin-6 and dexamethasone, those are still working against Omicron.
So let's talk to people at home who, there are two schools of people right now. There are those who are saying, I'm just going to enjoy my Christmas, and there are those who are scared of trying to get together for Christmas. What's your professional advice as to how people should approach this upcoming weekend to keep everybody safe?
Well, as I mentioned, everybody at this stage of the pandemic, all of us are tired. We want to definitely try to get together, visit friends, stay with family, but we need to be responsible. That means that, and it's definitely unavoidable that is going to happen, but at least we need to act with a lot of responsibility. Again, as I mentioned, all of us are in this together. I mean that we need to be able to do those things that are until no proven that are working, and that is we need to wear our mask, we need to clean our hands, wash our hands, we need to try to keep our distance. It's an important trying to avoid crowded places, and make sure that if it's the case, we need to make sure that this is a properly ventilated areas. No?
So like crowded supermarkets that don't have open ventilation, try not to spend too much time in there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because of course the transmission or the transmissibility, it depends on the setting, it depends on the contacts we are, and also the length of time we spend with those contacts. No? I mean that the less time that we spend in a place that is not properly ventilated is going to be the best. No?
Beyond Omicron, are you at all concerned with the proposed reopening of the border on January 1st, considering the fact that we will have an influx of people who will be coming into the country and leaving the country via these terrestrial points?
Well, those I think so. Some areas that are very controversial in terms of lockdown or not. No, of course, the World Health Organization is against, at least is proposing that lockdown is not the way, because of the different impacts in all aspects. But mainly right now, one of the things is the mental health, and of course the economic impact that is causing into the countries. No?
Yeah.
And I believe as the advisory medical committee, we give our recommendations to the government on those aspects. And then, as we say, the different approaches that is being recommended is the layer approach. I mean that we go and do a step by step, and trying to release some of these measures based on that.
Yeah. And when you speak of layer, that's one of the things I know we've been saying here, that basically all the protocols work together. Your vaccination, your mask, the distance, washing your hands. These are all things that, and distance, these are all things that we have to do together. Do you think that families with vulnerable persons should consider outdoor meals? Should they distance, especially if they don't all reside in the same home? Should they wear masks indoors if necessary?
Well, if you have someone who is vulnerable like this, so we need to act responsible based on that. No, we need to make sure that everybody is vaccinated. If it's already a time of the booster, that they have the booster, and also if it's needed, we need to wear mask during that point of time. Now, important, we are focused on Omicron, but Delta is still there.
Yeah.
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 I mean, and Delta
very much
is
there.
right. I mean that please don't forget because this is one of the things that we are probably sometimes focused on that, but Delta is still there, very aggressive, and I think so is something that we cannot forget.
All right. Well, Doc, thank you so much for coming in. It's not what everybody wants to hear for Christmas, but it is important
I know.
that we're able to give people the correct information as it becomes available.
Thank you, and I just want to wish you everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and please stay safe.
Yes, absolutely. All right, and from talking about the latest variant, we're shifting gears. So this week we are going to be featuring some cultural Christmas treats. And we don't mean cultures that we typically
Our
talk
traditional
about.
cultures, not
That's
that.
right. So today our first feature is going to be Lebanese sweet treats for the Christmas. We have Chef Roger with us, and he is going to be showing us the recipe, and I look forward to sampling. That's what's coming up next, so stay tuned.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.